Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. I am so excited to be filming this video for you guys today because today we are going to be diving into a topic that I've wanted to discuss for a very long time. I've touched on a lot of these topics throughout various videos covering awards season throughout the years, but today we're going to consolidate all of my thoughts, feelings, emotions on the topic of awards season and in particular the Oscars so that we can really dive into the problems that I have identified with the Academy Awards, whether it be the ceremony or the idea itself. And this is perfect timing because of course the 95th Academy Awards ceremony is just around the corner next week. So before I react to whatever happens during that ceremony, I thought it'd be a good idea to dive into the general problems and issues that I have identified with the Academy Awards. And also to end on a positive note, I'm going to be discussing the solutions, okay? The ways in which I think that the Academy could improve some of these problems. And of course, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. I will of course be reacting to the 95th Academy Awards next week, so you can look forward to that and plenty more. But now, without further ado guys, let's get into the nitty-gritty of this topic and discuss everything wrong with the Oscars. Into the problems facing the current Academy Awards, I thought it'd be a fun idea to take a look back at the history of the Oscars themselves. So we're going to take a quick detour to this Wikipedia article and talk about the backstory of the Oscars to better understand, how it is that we got here. So the first Academy Awards presentation was held on May 16th in 1929 at a private dinner function at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel with an audience of about 270 people. The post-awards party was held at the Mayfair Hotel and the cost of guest tickets for that night's ceremony was about $5. By the way, side note, completely unrelated side note, I have been rewatching Peaky Blinders, okay, the British TV series, which actually takes place at roughly, the early 1920s as well. And every time they throw a price around for something, I just get so shook. I feel like throwing up. Every time someone says, oh, I'm going to pay you 4 shillings, I'm like, what are these prices? Inflation is a bitch, okay? But anywho, let's continue. 15 statuettes were awarded in this first ceremony, honoring artists, directors, and other participants in the filmmaking industry of the time for their works during the 1927 to 1928 period. The ceremony ran for 15 minutes. 15 minutes. 15. So they really said this could have been an email, but we don't have emails yet. So we're just gonna hand out these awards, these statues, and then we're gonna clap and then we're gonna go home. Or we'll go to our after party that costs $5. 15 minutes. Keep that in mind. Let's continue. For the first ceremony, winners were announced to the media 3 months earlier. And for the second ceremony in 1930, and for the rest of the decade, the results were given to newspapers for publication at 11 p.m. on the night of the awards. But in 1940, the Los Angeles Times announced the winners before the ceremony began, and as a result, the following year, the Academy started using a sealed envelope to reveal the names of the winners. So basically, for the first Academy Awards, people already knew who the winners were 3 months prior, and the night itself was more about celebrating the nominees and I guess the winners, who were already told that they were going to win on the night. They were handed their statues, like I said, 15-minute ceremony, and then they went off and had a party at the Mayfair Hotel, and bada bing, bada boom, we're done. Okay, bada bing, bada boom, we're done. But obviously that is very different to the ceremony that we have come to know over the last few decades. So what happened here? Well, over the years, the industry has grown substantially, right? You know, the Hollywood filmmaking industry is the second biggest industry in the world, and the biggest in terms of reach across the world, if you don't consider, you know, one country's population, like in the case of India. And of course, because the Oscars have that prestige of being the first, right? They were number one, the first ever, you know, major filmmaking awards, and so they are considered the most prestigious awards in the industry. So here we have a fatal combination of having the first and most prestigious filmmaking awards in the biggest filmmaking industry in the whole world. And this is why the Oscars remain relevant, you know, despite what detractors may say, on top of the fact that throughout the 20th century, you know, the way that the Oscars was delivered to the audience completely changed. As you saw here, in the first ceremony, it was just a private dinner event with the people in the industry receiving their awards and then, you know, having a party afterwards. And that's how most industries do it, right? Like, most industries will have a little cute awards ceremony for the people that have worked really hard in that industry and they want to recognize them. So they'll hire out a room in a hotel, they'll have a nice dinner and an after party, and that'll be that. But the difference with the Oscars, of course, is the fact that it became a televised event viewed by millions of people, first of all across the country, but then across the world. And that is a large part as well of why the Oscars has remained such a prestigious, you know, relevant awards show, is because it has that global notoriety, and because audiences have been able to, you know, see the awards and see the glamour and the glitz and the prestige attached to them. That sort of marketing is generational. Okay, it's the reason why, even though I wasn't born anywhere near the 1950s, I still know what that damn statue looks like. It is extremely effective marketing. And speaking of extremely effective marketing, of course we can't go further into this video without at least touching on why it is that these awards matter in the first place. Because I see this often, you know, I see people say, why does this matter? It doesn't matter, who cares, blah 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 blah, Hollywood is weird, blah 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 blah. But the reality is, okay, because of the strength of the marketing of the Oscars throughout the 20th century, it has still remained an extremely relevant and powerful symbol within the Hollywood kind of filmmaking industry. And the Oscars still remain one of the very few awards, and I'm talking awards in general across all of showbiz, and not just in the filmmaking industry, but, you know, in music with the Grammys and the Tonys and theatre. You know, the Oscars are one of the very few awards that general audiences recognize, and as a result it continues to be an extremely powerful marketing tool for not only, you know, films themselves and those projects, but also the people associated with them. There's a reason why you see actors, you know, constantly have Oscar nominated or Oscar winner attached to their name when they're working on a new project. It's because it's a very powerful status symbol within the industry, and one of the very few kind of symbols that people recognize, you know, even if they're not film enthusiasts. And not to mention the respect and notoriety that comes with being Oscar nominated or being an Oscar winner within the industry itself, you know, not just with mainstream audiences, but if you have a casting director who hears, you know, Oscar nominated attached to your name, their ears are gonna perk up. They're gonna be like, oh, Oscar nominated, eh? And that list all of a sudden is gonna become real short, and you're likely gonna be chosen for the role, because that's the skill of approval that you have next to your name, that, like I said, is a very powerful marketing tool, but not just for mainstream audiences, but for people in the industry itself. Especially if you consider that producers have to basically sell a package to a studio when they want to get a film made, and it helps if that package has some Oscar nominated or Oscar winning talent attached to it. So yeah, for people in the industry, being an Oscar winner or even being nominated for an Oscar can really transform your life. It can absolutely change your career. The stakes are really high here. And so now we need to discuss why it is that it seems as though the Oscars are going so wrong lately. Now that we have established why it's important for them to go right, let's talk about all the ways that they've gone wrong. So first up, let's just rip this band-aid off, shall we? We need to talk about the elephant in the room. We need to talk about the controversies. Yeah, the controversies have been numerous and fatal. And we're talking about the Me Too movement. We're talking about Oscars So White. I mean, it is truly astounding the level of, you know, problems and issues that has surrounded this industry in the last 20 plus years because of, you know, how open things are in the media these days because of social media, but also because of this change, this shift in the way that Hollywood is seen by mainstream audiences, which we'll talk about a bit more later. All of this has just been happening on such a global stage where everyone is watching, everyone has been paying attention each and every time. I mean, we're not talking about petty things here. We're talking about serious issues, widespread sexual assault, obvious, clear as day racism. I mean, this is not for the faint of heart, guys. And so how could you possibly expect members of, you know, mainstream audiences to tune into your live broadcast and celebrate the industry with you whilst they also know that all of these problems are plaguing said industry? How can you expect that? How can you expect audiences to do that? Of course, it's going to be tough for them to cheer you on when you have all of that scandal and controversy circulating around you. And not to mention that oftentimes, you know, this controversy has been a long time coming. These aren't incidents that happen in a blink of an eye and no one saw this coming. In the case of the Harvey Weinstein scandal, this guy had been operating in this way for decades, and people in the industry knew about it. You had people making jokes about it in the Golden Globes, and it was like a known thing that was just accepted as, oh, this is just part of being in the industry, I guess. And so it's like, there's no excuse, there's no defense, there's no excuse. How are we supposed to clap for you when you are all complicit? And it's the same thing with the Oscars So White. You know, I recently talked about my contempt, my anger towards the fact that Viola Davis had not been nominated for the Oscar, you know, for the 95th Academy Awards. And I brought up this video of Eddie Murphy talking about the racism within the Academy back in the 1990s. I think it was 1994. And so at this point, it's like, he already discussed this openly in front of everyone in 1994, and we can see it already way before then. You know, at that point, the ceremony had been going on for 70 years. Way before then, we saw the discrimination at play for decades after decades after decades. So again, there's no excuse. It's not like you didn't know. Like, how are we having the same conversation 90 years on? That's ridiculous. So as a result of all of this scandal and controversy that has circled the industry and specifically the Academy over these years, a lot of people have decided to just tune out and not support the awards ceremony because they feel like clapping along to this awards ceremony is so disingenuous, okay, and so insincere when you consider the real life, heavy, troublesome issues that are plaguing this industry. So they're aware that this is something that they need to address, but their answer has been to try and get away with doing the very bare minimum. Like literally the bare minimum. They're like, listen, we hear you, we see you, whether or not we'll do something about it remains to be seen, but listen, just look at these stars. They're so gorgeous and they're shining in their blood diamonds and they're wearing a ribbon, so like, we're trying. What do you want from us? Now, when it comes to the Me Too movement and matters of sexual assault and other such crimes, that's not really something that the Academy can tackle on its own. It's something that the industry needs to kind of rectify and deal with, and you know, the legal courts also have to get involved with that and hold these institutions accountable. But when it comes to things like Oscars So White, which is a specifically kind of industry and an Academy Awards based problem, there is much more that the Academy can do there. They've already started to induct more and more people of color and, you know, female filmmakers and talent into the Academy so that they can vote and be a part of that voting body. But there's still the issue of some of the older generations of Academy Awards voters who remain there for life. Seemingly, like they are allowed to vote and vote and vote year after year for life, and there are huge issues with, you know, these Academy Awards voters, first of all, not even being a part of the industry anymore. You know, they hadn't worked for decades and yet they're still allowed to vote somehow. And also Academy Awards voters in general, regardless of their age, just not watching the stuff that they're supposed to. This pisses me off. You guys know I go in rants like this every single year when I'm dealing with award season, but Academy Awards voters that don't watch the films that they're supposed to be voting for piss me off to no end. It pisses me off to no end. Your job is to watch a film. What? In order for you to be in the Academy, you just need to watch a bunch of films. Like, how hard can that be, truly? How hard can that be? That really does annoy me, especially because the films have already been like selected for you. It's been curated for you. You don't have to watch every single film in the world, even though I would personally prefer it if these voters watched as many films as possible so they could get a good view of what the best of the year really was. But that's not gonna happen. These people are busy. Like I said, some of them are actually working in the industry, so fair enough. But the fact that you're not even watching the animated films, for instance, are notoriously neglected. People are out here asking their kids what they think. It's a mess. It's a mess. And like I said, the stakes are high because these awards are supposed to be prestigious and they're supposed to change lives. So like, can we take this a bit more seriously, please? So long story short, the scandals and controversies that circulate the Oscars continue to mar the reputation of the Academy Awards and the Academy at large. And this does lead to fewer people being interested in what the Academy has to say because they see them as so hypocritical and insincere. And unless actual palpable industry-wide change is seen by the audience, those who are so strongly against the Academy Awards aren't going to be indulging them in award ceremonies anytime soon. Okay, so that was a tough one. That was a tough problem to get through. But the next problem with the Academy Awards is a little bit more, you know, light-hearted, but still no less an issue. And that is the rise of Oscar bait movies. Now, back in the day, if we rewind our clocks once again, you'll see that a lot of the awards-worthy movies used to actually be crowd pleasers. They used to be films that mainstream audiences had actually flocked to throughout the year. Now, there are so many differences to how these films were distributed back in the day, the fact that, you know, they didn't really have global releases in the way that we do nowadays, and also the fact that exhibitors used to show these films for months on end, which meant that more people would come to see these movies over time throughout the year. So there are so many changes that have taken place in the last 90 years when it comes to the film industry and the distribution model. But somewhere along the way, from 1930 to today, we've gone from having these, you know, films that were beloved by mainstream audiences, these crowd-pleasing films being considered awards worthy, to the vast majority of films that are considered awards worthy being very niche, you know, small Oscar baity films that very few people have actually seen throughout the year. And oftentimes that's even by design, because a lot of these films have very limited releases at the end of the year to capitalize on awards season. What happened? Well, long story short, a lot of that has to do with one Schweinstein. A lot of that has to do with this individual who was the most thanked producer in all of Hollywood for all of the awards ceremonies from like the late 1980s to the early 2000s. And that was because he, who shall not be named, was a very prolific producer and a very prolific man when it came to getting Oscars and getting awards for his projects at Miramax. So, you know, this producer has helped shape the awards circuit in general, okay, into this like political campaign. I mean, it was always a political campaign, but he was able to streamline the kind of process of awards campaigning, and it became very formulaic. And that's how we've ended up, you know, with this very predictable formula of having these Oscar baity films that, you know, come out in limited release at the end of the year, and very few people get to see them, but the people who count get get to see them, and that's all that matters, because they are the voters, and if these films have the right amount of momentum as well as positive reviews, they will end up on the board. Now, of course, there are always some exceptions to the rule. We do have some blockbusters that kind of peak in there, like Black Panther and Mad Max, and of course Top Gun most recently. But for the most part these days, we do expect to see these smaller, more niche, more independent films to rise up in awards season and be deemed as awards worthy. Now, is that a bad thing, objectively speaking? No. I still wish that awards voters would watch more movies and more different kinds of movies as well. I still think that that would be great and ideal. Okay, in my little imaginary utopia, I would expect awards voters to watch films, whatever. But I would say that it's not the worst thing in the world to have these smaller films be highlighted during awards season, because I mean, they're smaller films. They're smaller films. They're not usually attached to notable IP that mainstream audiences already know. They tend to have, you know, good talent, you know, actors who are doing the work, doing the actoring in these films. So they could be the driving force for the box office of the movie, but most of the time it's having your film's name attached to Academy Award nominated or Golden Globe nominated that's going to get the mainstream audience's attention, at least in theory. But in practice these days, that has seemingly become less and less important to mainstream audiences. And again, there are all these different reasons for that. I think a huge reason is streaming. I think a lot of people, you know, deem these smaller films as being streaming movies, films that you can check out along the line when they come out, you know, on VOD perhaps, but mostly in Netflix, you know, or Disney Plus or wherever. And of course, another factor that needs to be considered in a post-2020 world is the pandemic, which has kind of exacerbated the trends that we already started to see in the 2010s due to streaming and the emergence of companies like Netflix. But now things are just 10 times worse, and now we've gotten to the point where, you know, having someone like Steven Spielberg remake a classic movie like West Side Story is not enough to get butts and seats in the multiplex anymore. But like I said, we've been noticing these trends for about over a decade now. So why does any of that affect the Oscars? Well, it affects the ratings. It affects the ratings. It's hard for you to switch on a 4-hour awards ceremony and be expected to root for a movie that you have never heard of. A movie that you have neither seen nor heard of nor care about. Imagine in this day and age, imagine that. Honestly, it's a tall order. Yeah, you're asking for too much for mainstream audiences to tune in to watch an awards ceremony celebrating the best in cinema, and the best in cinema are a bunch of films that you have never even heard of. It's kind of like they're calling you stupid. Like, it's kind of it's giving dummy, it's giving idiot. And this is a symptom of this disconnect, which we'll talk about in a second. But this glaring disconnect between the Academy wanting you to tune into this awards ceremony and, you know, watch the live broadcast and build up the ratings, whilst at the same time wanting to pat themselves on the back and celebrate the best of filmmaking that year, which many people have not even seen or really engaged with or really care about. That chasm between the two is just getting wider and wider every single year, and it's a result of that formula that Shmarmy Weinstein developed in the, you know, late 1980s going on to the early 2000s. And I think someone somewhere is gonna have to come up with a different formula to make the Oscars feel more relevant to mainstream audiences, if in fact the Oscars are still interested in driving the discussion amongst mainstream audiences anymore. And it seems like I'm going to be answering my own question with the next problem with the Oscars, and that is the Academy does not know what to do with the Oscars. As I said before, there is this disconnect between the Academy wanting the awards ceremony to be, you know, a live broadcaster ceremony that's seen from all around the world by millions of people, and people will tune in to that live broadcast and be engaged and get excited about the Hollywood film industry, versus having an awards ceremony to celebrate the best of the very best of that year within this industry, and for the industry members to pat themselves on the back for their own professional achievements. In the 20th century, these two elements of the Oscars seem to coexist pretty well and very successfully, which led to a prestigious awards ceremony rewarding the best in the filmmaking industry, whilst at the same time garnering a lot of attention, a lot of love, a lot of fascination by mainstream audiences that tuned into the broadcast itself. But nowadays, there, like I said, is a huge chasm between the two. And like I said as well, there are many reasons for that. Social media, streaming, you know, these different media entities are constantly fighting tooth and nail for our attention. I'm fighting right now for your attention. I'm fighting right now in this extremely long video for your attention. Everyone wants your eyes to be on them, and the Academy is no exception. The Oscars used to get a bunch of eyes on it purely because of the prestige and the historical value of this awards ceremony. It brought the glitz and the glam. It was an event of the season, event of a year even. But now that shine that the ceremony used to have has started to dull. And like I said, the scandals and the fact that a lot of the awards contenders are very unknown and not cared about certainly doesn't help. And now we're seeing the Academy war with the two elements that it's fundamentally based off of, and there is a bigger disconnect than ever before. And this is why year after year you see the Academy scrambling, trying to find a way to deal with this problem. And last year was the most egregious example of that, where the Academy made some very questionable decisions about the broadcast. They decided they would not be broadcasting some of the more technical awards in order to decrease the time of the broadcast itself, because people find it too long. And then the big kicker was, of course, when they decided to have these like fan voted awards like biggest movie moment. And it was just a bunch of Snyder fans with bots. Like, it was so embarrassing. So yeah, the Academy is really struggling. Okay, it's scrambling, trying to find a way to reconcile these two big questions. They don't know, and the longer it takes them to figure out the answer to this question, the more the ratings will continue to plummet. So next up, for problem number 4, we have overexposed celebrity. Now, the idea of celebrity, the idea of movie stars has vastly transformed in the last 90 years that the Oscars has been taking part in. If you think about the perceptions of movie stars that existed during the studio system days in Hollywood, the golden era of Hollywood, if you will. I mean, there you had stars that were basically controlled by the studio in every aspect of their careers and their lives at large. And so their images were very carefully curated. You know, people only saw these stars during premieres, during award season. They always looked a certain way. They were kind of like these godlike figures that were always seen and rarely heard, except for when they were acting in something or receiving an award for acting well in something. So it was a very different flavor of celebrity and of movie stardom in comparison to the flavor that we have become accustomed to nowadays, in large part due to, yes, say it with me, social media. Social media has made celebrities too accessible. Yep, I said it. I did see that recently Ana de Armas did talk about how the movie star is dead, you know, and that is in large part due to social media in her mind. And I would agree that social media has eroded the idea of the movie star, especially if you're using that same idea, you know, the same definition that used to exist during the days of the Hollywood studio system, which had its issues. issues, by the way. Side note, let's not glorify the studio system. Let's not do that. You know, people always like to look back in the past with these rose-tinted glasses, and I'm guilty of this oftentimes as well. Less so because I'm a black woman anyway, but I can sometimes be guilty of this. But the Hollywood studio system is not something that we want to go back to. Okay, like, it had its problems, especially for actresses, let's not forget. But yes, Ana de Armas does have a point when she says that social media has eroded the idea of the movie star. I completely agree. Now, what does this have to do with the Oscars? Well, like I said, it used to be that the very few times when you saw your favorite actress, it would be during these grand events where there was a lot of pomp and circumstance. I mean, Hollywood took a lot of pages from the book of the royal families, you know, of Europe, with the pomp and circumstance and ceremony that they create around awards and around premieres. There used to be the glam and the glitz and the magic of Hollywood that would be sprinkled throughout these events, and those would be the very few times that you would see your favorite stars. And so fans kind of put them on this pedestal of this godlike being status. But that has been so vastly reduced now that we have this constant access to these stars through social media, where we see everything. They show us everything. We see these guys all the freaking time, and it's not special anymore. It's not special anymore. Who cares? And yes, we might like some of them, they might have great personalities, but just as equally we might hate the others. Okay, some of them we hate, and sometimes they put their foot in their mouth and they say something stupid or discriminatory or derogatory that ends up getting them cancelled. And so yeah, these celebrities are overexposed. And so now a ceremony that used to be this one event where we would see all of our favorite celebrities together, all glitzed and glammed up, you know, talking for the first time in months, you know, because we haven't seen their films in months. Now it's like, oh, we've heard that person speak a million times, and oftentimes they're saying something stupid, so we're tired. And even though, make no mistake, these celebrities still have PR machines kind of working around them, cultivating a very specific image that they want their fans to see, it's not the same kind of machinery that used to be at work under the studio system in Hollywood. It's a very different kind of celebrity, like I said, a different flavor, one that appeals more to relatability. You know, that's a shift in what audiences want to see from their celebrities and influencers. They want to see people that are more relatable, but as a result, it has kind of killed the shine and the sparkle that the Oscars used to have, because now you have a bunch of relatable people walking around in dresses and heels that they can't walk in. Where's the glitz? Where's the glamour? What's the point? And by the way, side note once again, it's not lost on me that a lot of the problems that I'm discussing surrounding the Oscars can actually also be applied to the royal family. Listen, I'm not saying there's a correlation. I'm just saying, you know, a lot of these problems are pretty applicable elsewhere also. But anywho, let's move on to the next problem. This last issue is to do with the ceremony itself. Yeah, it's boring. It's boring, it's old-fashioned and boring. Oh, speaking of the royal family, listen, in a second we're gonna talk about some of my fixes, some of my proposed solutions for these issues, in particular the live broadcast itself. But before we get into all of that good stuff, we need to acknowledge the problem, right? Before we find the solution, we must acknowledge the problem. And the problem here is that the ceremony is just like boring. Like, it's not giving, I'm afraid. Remember when I said that people are fighting for our attention left, right and center? Yeah, the Oscars doesn't seem to be fighting very hard. And I genuinely don't understand. Maybe it's like a budget issue, but in my mind I'm like, if you're the Academy, how do you even have a budget? Like, my budget would be endless. Because you need to save this train wreck. Like, I would be spending the money to fix these problems. We need a change of hosts first and foremost. It used to be that guy, Billy Crystal, was that his name? When he was the kind of king of hosting the Oscars, I was a bit too young. So even though I remember him vaguely, I don't quite remember, you know, specific bits that he used to do. But my impression is that he was quite the showman. And I think we need to go back back to that. Yeah, I think we need to go back to this being a show. We need to be exciting. We need to be engaging. And I genuinely don't understand why the Academy doesn't know how to do this, because they have 95 years worth of data to draw from. Like, do you know what I mean? They have 95. When you've been doing this for 95 years, you should know what you're doing at that point. Like, if you don't get it by then sis, we need to have an intervention. 95 years, okay, maybe not 95 years of the live broadcast, but a significant number of decades of broadcasting this stuff live. You know what people Google when they want to see highlights of the Oscars. You should know, you know, the moments where people tuned in the most when it comes to the ratings. They have all of that data. I genuinely don't understand why they can't take that data and be like, okay, we know what people love and we know what people don't like as much, so like, let's do more of the former rather than the latter. To me, this is just common sense. Like, if people tuned in for the live performance of We Don't Talk About Bruno, then how about we do more stuff like that? Like, it's just so simple to me. Again, we'll talk about the fixes in a second, but something needs to be done about this live broadcast because it's just not working. And I don't think it's just about how long the broadcast itself is, because listen, I personally, and again, I am a bit biased because I'm a cinephile and obviously I love movies and blah, blah, blah. But I personally wouldn't mind sitting through a 4-hour broadcast if the show was entertaining and unexpected and full of surprises and just stuff that I wanted to see. Like, I genuinely would not mind. It's the same thing with like a 3-hour movie where you're like, oh, do I want to sit through a 3-hour movie? But if the movie is banging, then I guess I will. Like, if it's a good time, then I'm up for a good time. The problem is, it's not a good time at the moment. The problem is with the ceremony as it currently stands is that it's a pointless exercise for mainstream audiences at best and a punishment for cinephiles and the industry itself at worst. Okay, so now that we've dived into all of the problems with the Academy Awards that I at least could identify, and again, if you have any other issues that you want to highlight, please be sure to share them down in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts as always. But now, to end things on a more positive note, we're going to be diving into some solutions because I'm nothing if not a problem solver. So here they are, some solutions for how I think the Academy could fix the Oscars. So for the first fix, when it comes to the problems of scandals and controversies, the serious issues that the Academy is facing at the moment, as I said before, there is no easy fix that the ceremony could solve for this one. There needs to be industry-wide policy changes at the end of the day. More power needs to be given to unions, okay? More power needs to be given to non-profit organizations looking out for bodies like actresses, for instance, who are in this industry and are targeted by these horrible producers and, you know, studio execs. You know, there needs to be more oversight at the end of the day. That's not something that can be solved by, you know, clapping at an awards ceremony or wearing a ribbon. These are real life, horrible, criminal activities oftentimes that have hugely detrimental effect on people's livelihoods and lives overall. So these are very serious issues that the government needs to get involved in, that non-profits need to get involved in, and that Hollywood really needs to take seriously. And in the case of the Oscars So White situation, as I said before, it's all about the voting body, but it's also about the industry at large. I think that this is something that the industry has been addressing. We have started to see more POC or female talent rise up the ranks, given more opportunities to make films, you know, the kinds of films that will be nominated for awards. So I think that is slowly but surely starting to happen. But the reason why I'm targeting the voting bodies now is because we're starting to see that even though the options are there, okay, even though the female directors, the POC directors are out here doing their jobs, even though these female, you know, actresses and the POC actresses are out here actoring for their lives, they're still not being recognized. So that's where I'm like, because we're starting to see the industry make these changes to allow these previously marginalized groups to be given such opportunities, but we're not seeing the fruits of these labors be reflected in awards season. that's why I have to cast my eyes towards the voting body, and that's why I think the changes need to be made to the voting body itself, so that the efforts of, you know, people in the industry helping to boost marginalized groups can actually be reflected during awards season. And changing the voting body isn't just important for the sake of representation, but it's also key to the evolution of the definition of what an awards worthy film is. Because like I said, the industry has kind of been stuck in this rut as a result of the Schwabi Weinstein era. And so what the definition of awards worthy fare has become very limited, very narrow. And I think a more diverse voting body, be it diverse in age, you know, gender, ethnic background, socioeconomic background, let's talk about those Nepo babies, okay? Having that kind of diversity in these voting bodies can help reshape the definition of awards worthy films. As can diversity in the media and the press itself, mind you, but that's a story for another day. Now let's get into some of the fixes for the awards ceremony itself. First of all, this is an idea that I've had for a long time, and the Academy actually did this one time, which is what kills me. But I think, okay, I sound like a petulant child, but I really do think that every year the Academy should invest in a good quality editor and get us a nice compilation, a nice moving, emotional, uplifting compilation of the best that the year has had to offer, you know, in filmmaking. And I'm not just talking about the awards contenders, I'm talking about everything. Like, let's celebrate film. Let's celebrate the film industry. Let's celebrate blockbusters. Let's celebrate superhero movies, niche films, foreign language movies, films from all around the world. Like, I really would like this kind of montage that starts off the awards to really showcase, you know, what the film industry, both in Hollywood and all across the world, has had to offer for that year. I think that would be a beautiful way to start off the ceremony, and I think it would set the tone for the ceremony being about film and the love of film. And I think it would be an easy fix too. They oftentimes have, you know, random performances at the beginning of the ceremony, or they have a host, you know, making these dumb jokes about some serious issues that will never be addressed, you know, in the ceremony itself. Get rid of all of that stuff. I'm just asking for a video. It's a very simple request. I'm just asking for a video celebrating the best of filmmaking for that previous year. And each year you could have a compilation like this. It can go up online. I mean, talk about capitalizing on social media. You know, oftentimes people are constantly on social media screen grabbing the most, you know, important or relevant moments for the ceremony. But if you have that circulating on social media, people would absolutely want to watch this clip celebrating the films that were released that previous year. And also it addresses the issue of mainstream audiences tapping out because most of the contenders are niche films that they've never even heard of. If you start off the ceremony by celebrating the films that mainstream audiences did go out to see, I think it would help put you in their good graces. And I think this celebration of filmmaking overall could continue throughout the ceremony, not just with an opening montage, but you could have the music, you know, the soundtracks featured in films throughout the year be scattered throughout the ceremony. I mean, wouldn't it be awesome if you all of a sudden, like, someone is presenting and you just hear the dun 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 of the Batman score by Michael Giacchino just all of a sudden playing? That would be so cool. Even though it's not nominated, the fact that it would be featured there just shows that it was one of the best scores of the year and it should have been nominated, and two, that it's a celebration of film from that previous year overall. And that way you don't even need to do the stupid fan voted awards that don't even get statues. You're kind of nodding to the fans and acknowledging that there are a bunch of great movies that were seen by mainstream audiences that deserve to be celebrated. And then aside from celebrating the year in film with an opening montage, my next idea is to have a dazzling opening sequence. Now listen, Ariana DeBose, she tried to do that at the BAFTAs. It didn't go well, but listen, my thing is, again, another reason why I'm just baffled by this. My thing is that not only is the Academy Awards an awards ceremony that has been taking place for 90 years and therefore they should know what they're doing at this point, but it's also one that is created by like the best of the very best in the industry. Like I genuinely don't understand how people who work in Hollywood don't know how to put on a show. That is kind of baffling to me. And I'm not saying that I expect Steven Spielberg to produce every single award ceremony. Like, I'm not saying that. I'm not expecting West Side Story levels of production here. But I am like, I mean, the year that West Side Story came out, like, okay, maybe it would be a bit of a task, but what if, you know, for example, the year that West Side Story came out, we had an opening sequence with the host where you have these dancers, you know, recreating the I Want to Be in America dance sequence. Guys, like, what if we got that on stage? That would actually be so cool. Let's have fun with it. Let's be cool. Let's be creative. Let's do something interesting and special to mark this special occasion. And again, it's still relevant. I mean, this is an award ceremony celebrating the best of film. Do you know how many characters and cinematic universes they have to draw from? Like, I am not understanding where this lack of imagination is coming from. It's truly baffling to me. And I think the superior way of entertaining us all would be to give us a spectacle the likes of which we have never seen before in live television. And that is something that could also surpass any language barriers. I mean, think of that, you know, whenever you have these hosts speaking English, telling their jokes about very specific kind of culturally based things, a lot of those jokes, you know, a lot of that sentiment is kind of lost across language barriers and cultural barriers. But if you give us a spectacle to behold, that will be appreciated from Los Angeles to London to Dubai to Tokyo. And my final idea of how to boost and improve the Oscars awards ceremony is kind of far-fetched, but hear me out for a second here. Just hear me out, okay? I think there should be a halftime show. I think there should be a halftime show. Am I the only one? I think there should be a halftime show. Who doesn't love the Super Bowl halftime show? Like, I love it, okay? And it's one of the most like popular elements of the Super Bowl year after year. People don't really talk about the match as much. I mean, sports enthusiasts do, but most of us talk about two things when it comes to the Super Bowl: trailers and the Super Bowl halftime show. And I think that should be both included in the Oscars, because duh, are we celebrating showbiz or not? I genuinely don't. Why are we not debuting trailers for the Oscars? Like, why are we not doing that? And why are we not giving the audience, okay, the world, a halftime show to break things up? Because the Oscars are long, just like the Super Bowl. And either way, it's going to be long, no matter what they try and do. So how about we at least give the audience a good time whilst they're there? This is only once a year, just like the Super Bowl. Give us a halftime show. Now, for this halftime show, I don't want it to be the same as the other performances, you know, throughout the ceremony where they perform the songs that are nominated for best song. Like, those performances, they can be scattered throughout, they're fine, although I would also up the ante on them, make them a bit more interesting, maybe perhaps make them a bit themed. And like, for me, the budget is no issue. Like, money is no issue, just make it work. Anyways, but for this performance, I'm thinking maybe a medley of like the biggest songs of the year from films. I don't know how it would work. I mean, in an ideal situation, you would have a We Don't Talk About Bruno, where that would be like in center stage during the halftime show. I don't know if we had that last year. I can't remember, you know, off the top of my head, but that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking of. Maybe we even celebrate, you know, songs from previous years or previous decades. I think that would be a good opportunity as well, kind of taking it back and looking at some of the biggest songs of the year. I think that would be a good idea. Like that time when Eminem just performed at the Oscars for no apparent reason. I think that would be a really good idea to have that be in the halftime show. Now it's all starting to make sense. I think, listen guys, I think my Oscars ceremony is shaping up to be a win. Okay, a huge W for the Academy. But of course, when it comes to the 95th Academy Awards, what's done is done at this point. They've already produced the show for us, and we're about to find out what that looks like in a few days. is. But in the meantime, guys, that's it from me. Now that I told you guys everything wrong with the Oscars, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this video, and if you have any extra issues with the Oscars, down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch your videos coming up, including of course my reaction to the 95th Academy Awards next week. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.